Hey everyone, it's Brad Berzer. You guys probably remember me, but just in case you've forgotten, I hope you're all doing well. What a strange moment in history we have here where we are all isolated one from another. So I hope you've been able to get some kind of internet access. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this, but I hope you have decent internet access as you're listening to this. And we're going to resume our classes. And so I'm recording this on Sunday afternoon, March 22nd. But this is for the Monday, March 23rd, 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock American Heritage courses. So, again, I miss all of you guys and I hope you're doing well. And I'm glad that we're able to connect, even if it's via the internet. And I'm recording this in an asynchronous fashion. So, all right. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to look back over your reader. But we're going to be looking at the reader today, and specifically we're going to be looking at the writings of Alexis de Tocqueville. So if you don't have your reader, I totally understand, but I did email everybody a PDF copy of the reader, so you should at least be able to read along with that if you don't have your actual physical reader with you. And just before we get started, I do hope you all had a really great spring break, and I hope that you're making the best of the time that you have with your family. So it has definitely been strange here, no question about that. Not a bad strange. I mean, I miss you guys. And it's weird. I went for, we couldn't go to Mass today because they won't allow gatherings. So we had an online through Facebook Mass. Father David did a really beautiful job, but it was still strange. Beautiful, but strange. And then I went for about an hour walk this morning, listening to a murder mystery as I went on my walk, and I was the only person on the street except I passed the Hillsdale security guy twice. We were it. So I did 4 miles around town and I saw nobody except for the security guard. So just so you know, and I'm sure some of you are probably wondering, Hillsdale's standing. As far as I know, we don't have any incidences of the coronavirus here. That may have changed as of this morning. I don't know. But as far as I know, we don't. At least none that have been tested positively, but it is really, really quiet here. So I'm giving this, if you guys are interested, you're probably not. But if you're interested, this is, I'm doing this from my home office, and you can see it's a little bit messy behind me. I've got lots of books and CDs and graphic novels and all my Batman action figures. So if you're wondering what's behind me, and if you've always kind of thought that I was probably a little odd, there it is. You've got proof. Okay, but let's get started. So we're going to look at de Tocqueville. And if you remember, before we left each other, right before spring break, we were talking about Alexis de Tocqueville. And we had started just looking at the very basic ideas of what a democracy is and how Alexis de Tocqueville thought about democracy, especially in terms of world civilization, and tried to figure out what was going on in a meta-historical way in the world and what role America played within that. So for those of you who have your reader, I want to turn to page 295, which is the opening page of the Alexis de Tocqueville reading. And he says, now, just a little bit of background. You guys remember, Alexis de Tocqueville is a very young man when he comes over to the United States with his best friend, Charles Beaumont. When they come over, they have been given a grant, which only means a leave. They weren't given money, but they were given a grant by the French king to study American prisons, because at that time, American prisons were regarded as the most humane and liberal in the world. And so de Tocqueville got this grant from the king, along with Beaumont, to come over to the United States and to study the American prison system, reform, right? What would have been the reform system, criminal justice. But de Tocqueville's real reason for coming over, and he stays over here for a little over a year, traveling throughout all of what's now the eastern United States, all the way up from New England down into the deep south. As he travels, he is really interested in this question of democracy. Now, again, he's a young man. He's barely older than all of you are. So he's probably around at the time that he comes over to America. He's about 25, 26. And he's got that desire to really understand what America is about and to figure out who and what we are. And we don't have to be bigoted and we don't have to be jingoistic to remember that America was something unusual. This republic, a republic had not existed since the Roman days, since ancient Rome. So here we have this republic, this attempt to create this experiment of liberty under law. And what did that mean? How did it work out? Here's how de Tocqueville puts this. So again, page 295 in the Reader. Amongst the novel objects that attracted my attention during my stay in the United States, nothing struck me more forcibly than the general equality of conditions. Right, just turn the page to 296. I readily discovered the prodigious influence which this primary fact. Now, we don't have this in your reading, but in that same introduction, just a few pages later, but we excised it from your reading. I don't remember exactly why we did that. But in de Tocqueville's original, he says it's not just a primary fact, but a providential fact. Right? This is from God. So, I readily discovered the prodigious influence which this primary fact exercises on the whole course of society by giving a certain direction to public opinion and a certain tenor to the laws, by imparting new maxims to the governing powers and peculiar habits to the governed. So think about those things that are being changed by this new notion of equality or democracy, which de Tocqueville, for better or worse, uses interchangeably throughout the book, throughout all of Democracy in America. And that's a bit of a problem because clearly you can believe in equality and not democracy, and you can also believe in democracy and not necessarily equality. But de Tocqueville tries to put both of those things together. But what do? It gives a certain direction to public opinion, a certain tenor to the laws, and new maxims to the governing powers and habits to the governed. He continues, I speedily perceived that the influence of this fact extends far beyond the political character and the laws of the country, and that it has no less empire over civil society than over the government. It creates opinions, engenders sentiments, suggests the ordinary practices of life, and modifies whatever it does not produce. So if you guys all go back a little over 2 weeks and remember when we were talking about this right before spring break, the only thing thus far in history that has been able to do this, that has been able to create opinion, engender sentiment, suggest the ordinary practices of life, and modify whatever it does not produce, is religion. Really, only Judeo-Christianity in the Western tradition has been able to do that. And now de Tocqueville is saying, this is amazing. We have this new way of thinking. We've gone beyond the Republic, and we're in this egalitarian democratic ethos. And in that very system of thought, we have the idea that all of these things can be changed in the way that Christianity once changed them. Now equality and democracy are replacing Christianity. That is, they're becoming a religion in and of themselves. The more I advanced in the study of American society, the more I perceived that the equality of conditions is the fundamental fact which all others seem to be derived, and the central point at which all my observations constantly terminated. I then turned my thoughts to my own hemisphere, right back to France, where I imagined that I discerned something analogous to the spectacle which the New World presented to me. I observed that the equality of conditions is daily progressing towards these extreme limits, which it seems to have reached in the United States, and that the democracy which governs the American communities appears to be rapidly rising into power in Europe. I hence conceived the idea of the book, which is now before the reader. Volume 1, published in 1835. Volume 2 will come out in 1840. But both volumes, you can see how serious they are. Right? This is the 2-volume set from Liberty Fund. These are massive tomes, massive works of sociology, of journalism, of psychology, of history. De Tocqueville was very advanced in the way that he understood how to observe things, how to understand them, how to comprehend them. So what's happening? We have no choice in the fact, and it is a primary and providential fact, we have no choice. God has so determined that the world is moving into an egalitarian phase. And as we talked about right before spring break, remember, though human beings have no choice in this process, this is inevitable. God has willed it. Though we have no choice in the process, we have all the choice in the world when it comes to implementing the very specifics of the process. So we ourselves don't get to choose this new age of equality, but we do get to choose what shape that equality will take. And that's very important. So, do we want an equality that brings everybody down, that just makes us all middling and lower, where we are all connected to one another by our least common denominator, the worst thing about ourselves? That is, that thing which we all share, probably our sin, our failings, is that the thing that holds us together? Or is there an equality in the sense that we are all equal to participate in this arena in which we use the gifts specifically given to us by God and nature, designed for our purpose? Do we use those to the benefit of the good of the whole? Is there an equality that starts at the highest things and then unleashes what our human potential is? De Tocqueville says it can go either way. We can either have this equality of the worst, or we can have the equality of the best. And he says further, whatever America decides will most likely be the way that the world goes. So he still has this idea that American exceptionalism reigns, but what happens with that is exceptionalism? Does it make the world better off or worse? And so this is that great burden. If you guys remember when we went to George Washington, and George Washington said this experiment now entrusted into the hands of the American people, de Tocqueville, 60 years later, is making essentially the same argument. What you Americans choose is what's going to shape the world. You really are the witness, you are the example, the touchstone, you are the fountainhead, and what you do will determine what much of the else of the world does. And I guess we could take that, though of course de Tocqueville, remember, is French and aristocratic and Roman Catholic. He's not American, he's not Protestant, he's not middle class, so he is everything that America is not. So it would be hard to say that there's something of hubris in de Tocqueville about this, but we could say maybe as Americans, there's a little bit of hubris in saying that this is up to us. But at the same time, there's a historical reality because we are that first great republic. We are in the new world. Things are happening here. There is an energy, an incredible energy that Americans are experiencing. And so we've got to figure out, what does that mean? So again, where's our equality? Are we going to be slaves to our passions? Or are we going to leaven everybody and make everybody better off and encourage all of us to be our best? Person A as a pianist, person B as a counselor, person C as a teacher. Are we jealous of their talents, or do we leaven them? Again, do we want an equality of mediocrity or one of excellence? And de Tocqueville, of course, is very much in favor of the one of excellence, but he says there are problems. So let's imagine when you're in a democratic society, one of the things that's naturally going to happen, according to de Tocqueville, is that it will be very difficult to go against the will of the majority. When you have the will of the majority acts almost as though it is the voice of God. And we don't go against the voice of God. We may be frightened by the voice of God, we may be inspired by it, but we don't neglect it. And de Tocqueville says there's something to that in the voice of the majority as well. Imagine the politician in a democratic society who stands up to his people and says, "You're fools. You're going absolutely the wrong direction. This is idiotic." The people will crucify that person, according to de Tocqueville. So it is very difficult in a mass society to actually stand for something that goes against the conventional wisdom. And hence, you're going to get a lot of conformity in democracy. You're going to have a lot of uniformity with equality. And that's a dangerous thing for de Tocqueville. It can be very good, but it also can be very, very dangerous. So there are times, and for those of you who've had a chance to read through the reading, he says this around page 310, page 311, and in the following, where he talks about what is the power exercised by the majority upon opinion in America. Well, quite often, he says, it can be the case, and this is just the downside of democracy, it can be the case that the majority trumps the rule of law. That is, we develop habits that are not necessarily conducive to our good character, not necessarily conducive to being good neighbors to one another, but they are conducive to all of us being conformable one to another. So one of the things we have to be very careful about, and this is a mistake many people have made, very, very learned people have made this mistake, where they tend to think that de Tocqueville's 2 volumes, Democracy in America, are a celebration of America and democracy. I think it would be better to say that there are aspects of this that are celebratory, but there are also many aspects in which we have de Tocqueville playing the Jeremiah. He is the prophet and he is warning us. He's the voice in the wilderness saying, stop, calm down, think about what you're doing, do not rush into this thing. And now that you've moved into the thing, step back, be objective, think what that matters. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to your society? What does it mean to your neighbor? Is this thing really beneficial simply because we've all gained the habit of doing it and we all have agreed collectively it's right? Is it really right? Is that merely the conformity from the pressure of the majority, or is it something that is true in all times and all places? So, if you have your textbook, your reader, I want to look at his greatest caution. And that is what we find on page 326 and 327. So please turn to 326 and 327 in your reader. And I'm going to read quite a bit here, and I would ask that you follow along with me. Again, you guys have to forgive me. This is new for me too, doing this online. So hopefully you have your readings right in front of you. But I want to turn to page 327. And we see in that second full paragraph, freedom has appeared in the world at different times and under various forms. It has not been exclusively bound to any social condition. Now, it's pretty important. Remember Western heritage. We had types of freedom in ancient Athens. We had a different type of freedom in ancient Corinth, and a different type of freedom in ancient Rome, and a different type of freedom in Carthage. We had freedoms in certain ways here and there. Sometimes we had freedoms in democracy. Sometimes we had freedoms in anarchy. Remember when you had to read the Otanes discussion from Herodotus and the histories, the discussion of those Persians, figuring out the one, the many, and the few, all of that. So, okay. We've had freedom in anarchy, we've had freedom in republics, we've had freedom even within dictatorships, and we've had freedom with democracy. So de Tocqueville says, don't automatically assume that simply because you're a democracy, that you're also free. Those two things don't have to go together. It is quite possible that you're free without being democratic. It's also quite possible that you're democratic and not free at all. If you have the whole will of the majority without the rights of the minority, you could have all kinds of oppression in your society. Now, maybe it's only over 20% of the people. Maybe it's only over 49.9% of the people. But there could still be serious oppression. Democracy is not equal to freedom. Those are not necessarily the same thing. So again, let me read. Freedom has appeared in the world at different times and under various forms. It has not been exclusively bound to any social condition. It is not confined to democracies. Freedom cannot therefore form the distinguishing characteristic of a democratic age. Think about the Middle Ages. Think about 1215, the Magna Carta. John there at Runnymede being restrained by the nobles. We wouldn't call that democratic in the least, but it was extremely libertarian. So here's liberty, but not democracy. Again, Freedom cannot therefore form the distinguishing characteristic of democratic ages. The peculiar and preponderating fact which marks those ages as its own is the equality of conditions. The ruling passion of men in these periods is their love for equality, not freedom. Ask not what singular charm the men of democratic ages find in being equal, or what special reasons they may have for clinging so tenaciously to equality, rather than to the other advantages which society holds out to them. Equality is the distinguishing characteristic of the age they live in. Again, not freedom. That of itself is enough to explain that they prefer it to all the rest. But independently of this reason, there are several others which will at all times habitually lead men to prefer equality to freedom. If a people could ever succeed in destroying or even in diminishing the equality which prevails in its own body, this could only be accomplished by long and laborious efforts. Its social condition must be modified, its laws abolished, its opinions superseded, its habits changed, its manners corrupted. But political liberty is more easily lost. To neglect to hold it fast is to allow it to escape. All right, so there's something unusual about liberty that does not exist with equality. Equality comes about in a way different than liberty does. And de Tocqueville says we have to understand this. So, number one, democracy does not equal liberty. Number two, equality and liberty are not the same thing. And men's desire for equality is not always the same thing as their desire for liberty. Men, therefore, not only cling to equality because it is dear to them, they also adhere to it because they think it will last forever. That political freedom may compromise in its excesses the tranquility, the property, the lives of individuals is obvious to the narrowest and most unthinking minds. All right, that bears repeating. That is a critical sentence for our whole study here. That political freedom may compromise in its excesses the tranquility, the property, and the lives of individuals is obvious to the narrowest and most unthinking minds. But on the contrary, none but attentive and clear-sighted men perceive the perils with which equality threatens us, and they commonly avoid pointing them out. Now, go back to our earlier example. If the entire crowd is moving this direction, who's the person who's going to stand up and yell stop without being trampled upon? That's what de Tocqueville says. Who in a democratic society wants to be the one to stand up and be Jeremiah? Even Jeremiah didn't want to be Jeremiah. This is what God had called him to do. He had a duty to follow that. But nobody wants to play the prophet, not in real society, because that means you have to go against everything that the people believe in. It's one thing if you have to go tell the king he's wrong. David, you screwed up. It's another thing to have to tell the entire country, America, you messed up. That's hard. Right? It's easier to condemn one man than it is to condemn all. This we do in a democracy when we argue something has gone wrong. They commonly avoid pointing it out. They know that the calamities they apprehend are remote and flatter themselves that they will only fall upon future generations, for which the present generation takes but little thought. Okay, let's just think about that for a moment. Anybody want to tell me? And you can't answer me because we're doing this not live. But anyone want to tell me what the national debt is? We keep running it up and running it up. It's about $22 trillion. Why? Because we keep thinking the future will pay it off. We don't worry. We should, but we don't worry about what the future will have to do. And in fact, what are we doing? What's the generation above me doing to you? What's my generation doing to you? We're enslaving you to debt. That's the kind of thing that Tocqueville is quite worried about. So they know that the calamities they apprehend are remote and flatter themselves that they will not only fall upon future generations, for which the present generation takes but little thought. The evils which freedom sometimes brings with it are immediate. It's pretty true, right? All we have to do is walk around a bad area of town, look at all the kinds of bad things that are going on in a free society. Now, of course, there are a billion great things going on in a free society, but a free society also has bad things going on. Walk around Boulder, Colorado. Think about what freedom there has done for those people. So what happens? The evils which freedom sometimes bring with it are immediate. They are apparent to all, and all are more or less affected by them. The evils which extreme equality may produce are slowly disclosed. They creep gradually into the social frame, and they are only seen at intervals. And at the moment at which they become most violent, habit already causes them to be no longer felt. Now, that's a stunning thing, right? Freedom, obvious. Here's the success. Here is someone who has done very well, here is someone who has failed. We see it right away, right? You free a people, take them out of socialism, take them out of Russia, 1991, take them out of Eastern Europe, 1989, make everybody free all at once. Some people with certain gifts are going to understand exactly what's happening at that moment. They're going to take advantage of it, and they're going to do incredibly well. Others are going to make poor choices, and they're going to do poorly. Now, it doesn't mean we're not angels. It doesn't mean we make one decision and everything falls from that. Maybe the person who in 1992 is doing really, really, really well is not doing so well in 2020. And maybe the person who wasn't doing that well in, say, 1994 is doing great now. Now, maybe their success has been only slow and gradual, but it's been there. Whereas the other person's been meteoric, up, down, wherever it may be. That's what freedom does. Equality, though, tends to flatten everything so that everybody is within just a certain framework, and it's obvious. We can see it. We don't see extreme wealth. We don't see extreme poverty. And of course, that's not really true, because we know that in socialist societies, the ruling class is always extremely wealthy. Always. Until, of course, everything falls apart, and then they're done. The advantage which freedom brings are only shown by length of time, and it is always easy to mistake the cause in which they originate. Right? How easy to do that? Does our freedom go back to 1776? Does it go back to 1215? I don't know. But look at the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1991. We know exactly when that started. We know when ramps had to go in to grocery stores. We know when the aisles had to be widened to allow wheelchairs. This is not a knock on the ADA. It's just an obvious thing of equality where we see, okay, there's a law. All of a sudden, everything changes. The very architecture changes. We can identify it. But if we say, when was there really an understanding of the dignity of the human person regardless of race? Well, when did that happen? Did that happen when Martin Luther King was hosed down by malicious, horrible bigots? Or did it happen when Congress passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act? It's hard. That's hard to know. Was there a change in attitude before there was a change in law, or did the law change the attitude? I have my own suspicions about that one, but regardless, it makes it very difficult to be able to identify exactly when freedom started, but we can always identify when equality started. The advantages which freedom brings are only shown by length of time, and it is always easy to mistake the cause in which they originate. Page 328 now, advantages of equality are instantaneous, and they may constantly be traced from their source. ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, 1991, which was basically Bush's compromise. You help him with the Gulf War, he'll help you with this big program. It was a trade-off, the welfare warfare state. And again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Americans with Disabilities Act, but It is a blatant example of an egalitarian democratic act where we can go back and say, why is it that every grocery store has exactly the same width of aisle when you go up to pay to the cash register? Well, that goes back to the ADA Act. We can identify that. Political liberty bestows exalted pleasures from time to time upon a certain number of citizens. Equality every day confers a number of small enjoyments on every man. The charms of equality are felt every instant and are within the reach of all. The noblest hearts are not insensible to them, and the most vulgar souls exult in them. Who among us, take the most radical libertarian anarchist in our group, who is not going to be okay with the wheelchair being able to get up to the cash register? Now, we may say, hey, society would have fixed that over time, the market would have fixed that, but it's now a fact. The reason it is fixed is because of the ADA Act of 1991. And probably very few of us, the noblest hearts, are not going to be insensible to that. The passion which equality engenders must therefore be at once strong and general. Men cannot enjoy political liberty unpurchased by some sacrifices. 1776, 1865, 1215, Thermopylae, right? Think about all the great sacrifices in history. Freedom only comes when there are huge sacrifices being made. And they have never obtained them without great exertion. But the pleasures of equality are self-proffered. Each of the petty incidents of life seems to occasion them, and in order to taste them, nothing is required but to live. Jump down to the bottom of that page, bottom of page 328. I think that democratic communities have a taste for freedom. They have a taste for it. It's not insatiable. They have a taste. Left to themselves, they will seek it, they will cherish it, and they will view any privation of it with regret. But for equality, their passion is ardent, insatiable, incessant, invincible. They call for equality and freedom, and if they cannot obtain that, they still call for equality in slavery. They will endure poverty, servitude, and barbarism, but they will not endure aristocracy. Now, someone ever tells you de Tocqueville wrote nothing but a positive description of democracy and America, you just have to point out this passage. De Tocqueville is brutal here. What will we Americans do? We will put up with poverty, servitude, and barbarism, but we will not allow excellence. That's incredible. To think about that and imagine you guys growing up, you around age 20, 21, think about how many games you played as kids, organized sporting events, organized by your communities, in which it was made sure that all of the kids got a participation ribbon, that there was no real winner, they didn't keep score. This is exactly what de Tocqueville predicted. This is what's going to happen in democracy. We're going to get to the point where we bring everybody down rather than promote everybody from here up. So there's one other thing that he says that we need to note here. In fact, I'm going to give us two other things, but one in the reading. And if you look on this last page, 329 to page 330 of the reading that we have here from de Tocqueville, give me a second. When we look at that, we see this new idea that arises in democratic society. And this word, and it's a term I want you to know, not just for this lecture, but certainly for the next midterm and for the final, is the term individualism. This was not a word in the English language until 1827. So right at our time period, we get this new word, individualism. And de Tocqueville says, this is on page 329, right below Book 2, Part 2, Chapter 2 of Individualism in Democratic Countries. I have shown how it is that in ages of equality, every man seeks for his opinions within himself. I am now about to show how it is that in the same ages, all his feelings are tuned towards himself alone. Individualism is a novel expression to which a novel idea has given birth. Our fathers were only acquainted with egotism. Egotism is a passionate and exaggerated love of self, which leads a man to connect everything with his own person and to prefer himself to everything in the world. But that's not individualism. Individualism, de Tocqueville says, is a mature and a calm feeling, not just egotism, not just a pure focus on selfish desires, but something mature and calm, which disposes each member of the community to sever himself from the mass of his fellow creatures and to draw apart with his family and his friends, so that after he has thus formed a little circle of his own, he willingly leaves society at large to itself. Egotism originates in blind instinct. Individualism proceeds from erroneous judgment more than from depraved feelings. It originates as much in the deficiencies of the mind as in the perversity of the heart. So egotism is all about me, all about Brad, whereas individualism is, all right, class, we really like Hillsdale College, but here's what I want to do. I'm going to encourage all of you in both sections to go with me. We're going to separate from Hillsdale. We'll still kind of wave to them every once in a while, but we're going to form our own independent little community within Hillsdale, and we're going to do our own thing. That's individualism. Individualism is the idea that we form societies merely around ourselves after rejecting the natural order of things. And that's what individualism is for de Tocqueville. Now, there is really a very good and a very bad in all of this, as always with de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville is warning us here that clearly there are problems with democracy, but then there are also these things that are just beautiful as well. These things that we have to be able to understand that matter for us in terms of recognizing that there is something about democracy, both which is good and that which is bad. We have to be careful that we are able to figure out which is which. But now remember, we could go off and form our own association. We could break from Hillsdale without really breaking from it. We could form a bursarism, and we'll go off and we'll create our own community. Now, many of you have already done that. You did that when you became a Pi Phi or a Kappa, or when you became a Chi-O, or you joined any of the various groups on campus. You didn't say goodbye to Hillsdale, but you did say there's something that Hillsdale as a whole is not providing me, and I can get it better by belonging to this smaller group. Maybe it's Catholic Society, maybe it's Mu Alpha, whatever it may be. We do this all the time. And de Tocqueville says this actually is not only a danger for America, but it also might be America's greatest strength. So you do not have this in your reader, so don't look for this. You're not going to find it. But in a few pages after what we just had in the original, so I was reading from volume 2 when we were talking about individualism, in chapter 5, right after what you read, de Tocqueville says there is an astonishing thing about Americans. He says, Americans of all ages, all conditions, and of all minds constantly unite. Not only do they have commercial and industrial associations in which they all take part, but they have also 1,000 other kinds: religious, moral, intellectual, serious, useless, general, particular, immense, small. Americans associate to celebrate holidays, establish seminaries, build inns, erect churches, distribute books, and send missionaries. In this way, they create hospitals, prisons, schools. If finally it is a matter of bringing a truth to light or of developing a sentiment with the support of a good example, they associate. A few good men, a perfect example of a group on campus that saw a need, created a group, and goes out and takes care of the problem. Wherever at the head of a new undertaking you see in France the government or in England a great lord, in America, you will find an association. Hillsdale College is that kind of association. The Pi Phis, the Kappas, the Chios, Mu Alpha, a few good men. These are all associations, the kinds of things that de Tocqueville says we do as Americans. We see homeless, we create an association and take care of the homeless. We see that the town is falling apart, we create a group to go out and paint it brighter. Whatever it may be, we see stray dogs, stray cats, we create the Humane Society. We have problems on the highways, we create the American Automobile Association. We do this all the time, and it's not just for companies. We do this in all aspects of our society with neighborhood associations everywhere. Now, here's the problem, de Tocqueville says. This is great. This is extremely important that we do this, that we associate. In fact, de Tocqueville says, the liberty to associate is therefore more precious, and the science of association more necessary among these peoples than all others. And it certainly becomes more precious and more necessary as equality is greater. So of all the rights we have, the right to life, liberty, property, the greatest one, de Tocqueville tells us, is the right to property, to associate one with another. You, me, and you, or you, and you. Whatever that association is, the fact that we have the right to do that. How contrary to the French Revolution, remember? There can be no sovereign body outside of the nation. None. No marriage, no community, no college, no school, no religion without permission of the nation. De Tocqueville says that is exactly the opposite of what it should be. We must be able to associate one with another. Here's the danger, though. It is easy to foresee a time that is coming when man will be more or less able to produce by himself alone the things that are most common and most necessary in life. So the task of the social power will grow constantly, and its very efforts will make it greater every day. The more it puts itself in the place of associations, that is, the more politics takes the role of associations. So there's a homeless person in town and no association forms to take care of it, the government will fill the void. Always, political power will come in. The more it puts itself in the place of associations, the more individuals will lose the idea of associating and will need it to come to its aid. So it's a vicious cycle. I see a homeless person, it's my duty to pick 3 or 4 of you, the 5 of us to get together to associate and take care of the homeless person. We don't do that, the government comes in and takes care of it for us. And then what happens? The next time we see a homeless person, you, and me don't even think we should help that person. We just call our congressman and say, hey, there's a problem, take care of it. We lose the ability to decide for ourselves as we give that power away. De Tocqueville says it is only through association that sentiments and ideas are renewed. The heart grows larger and the human mind develops only by the reciprocal action of men helping one another. A government can no more suffice for maintaining alone and for renewing the circulation of sentiments and ideas among a great people than for conducting all of its industrial enterprises. From the moment the government tries to emerge from its political sphere in order to throw itself into this new path of association, it will exercise an unbearable tyranny, even without wanting to do so. Even if it's not its intention, even if it doesn't want to crush us, it wants to help us, it will tyrannize us. It will do so even without wanting to. For government only knows how to dictate precise rules. It imposes the sentiments and the ideas that it favors, and it is always difficult to distinguish its counsels from its orders. As soon as some inhabitants of the United States have conceived of a sentiment or an idea that they want to bring about in the world, they seek each other out. And when they have found each other, they unite. From that moment, they are no longer isolated men, but a power that is seen from afar and whose actions serve as an example. A power that speaks and one to which we will listen. So let's take that example again from just a few moments ago. Our 2 sections could go off and form our own little Berzerianism. But by doing so, we make Hillsdale less, not greater. Now, if we form our little Bazarianism in favor of Dr. Arnn and Moss Hall, that's different. If we're just kind of seceding, that's a problem. But if we use our own local power and community to help the good, the common good of the little Republic of Hillsdale, we have done great. And at that point, we've actually aided in the solidification of Hillsdale as an association through its own associations. And therefore, when the federal government looks at us, it doesn't just see us as that odd little college, it sees us as a serious power to be taken seriously. That's what de Tocqueville says is so important about association. Okay, well, I'm not exactly sure, but I think I took you guys over. I remember when I've done this in class, I usually tell you I'll give you that time back. If I did take over a little bit more than 15 minutes, I apologize. Guys, I miss you all. I'm sorry that the world is what it is. We have no choice about it. All we can do, of course, is to choose to do the good, to pursue the truth, and try and find the beautiful. That's it, guys. I miss you. Be good to one another. Love one another. Keep studying. Read your Heritage Reader. If you have questions, don't hesitate to email me. Until class on Wednesday. Oh, and on Wednesday, we will be reading Calhoun and talking about Calhoun. All right, just so you know if you want to get ready for that. But until then, God bless, and I hope you guys have a great Monday and Tuesday. Thanks.